Welcome back. In this video we're going to make some final tweaks to our game and get ready for publishing. Now in the last video we added one more small tweak to get it to work well on a mobile device, and that was to add this input.get button up looking for the fire 1, which Unity maps to the left mouse button and also maps to the single tap on the screen. So by putting that into our bunny controller logic, we were able to get the bunny to jump when we tap the screen. Now if we have a look at our title and we change our build settings so that we are running on Android, or targeting Android by selecting Android there and clicking switch platform, we will see that under the game option now we can look to see what our game will look like at different resolutions. So you see at a landscape mode, it's looking pretty good. It's resizing to everything and everything's staying on the screen and not getting clipped. But in portrait mode things are still getting chopped off. That's okay. Our game's designed to run in landscape mode, and so what we can do is when we get to building our mobile version of the apps, we can constrain it to only run in landscape mode. In landscape mode. If we look at the other resolutions, however, everything is looking pretty good in landscape. If we go and switch our platform to iOS, which we can't build because we're on a Windows platform, but we can still do previews. We can see we can now select different types of iPhone devices, and we can see that on an iPhone wide or on an iPhone 5, as well as iPads, everything is looking pretty good. Now if you notice very carefully, or if you look very carefully, you'll notice that the button has become kind of unclear and jaggy, kind of compressed looking on the edges there. And the reason for this is because of the way the asset is being compressed when running on, or going to be run on, an iOS device. Normally that doesn't matter for these kinds of sprites, but for this here it's really quite noticeable. So we can fix that by finding our sprite, our button 9 slice, which is the image that we're using to do the outline of the button there. And you'll see that under the settings here, it is currently set to a format of compressed, which is great from a performance point of view because it minimizes the amount of data that gets sent to the GPU, so that it doesn't take as much texture memory and it can draw a lot faster. But unfortunately, because it's compressed, it's adding all these kind of artifacts to our button. So the easiest fix is if you just go to the format here and select true color and then click on the apply button, you'll see we now get a nice clean looking button on all the different screen sizes that we have or need or want over there. We'll come back to that option in a later video when we're dealing with performance optimization for mobile devices or for your game, but for the moment we'll just set just that one sprite to have true color, and that fixes that problem there. Now if we say set this to a iPad wide and we run the game, we see everything's looking pretty good. We click on start, everything's looking pretty good, except the score is looking rather large, and this becomes really noticeable if we go to an older device like an old iPhone. We see that the score is taking up a large amount of the screen, so we need to fix that, and that is pretty easy to fix. So if we go to the scenes menu and we open up our game scene, we have the giant font there. If we go and select our canvas in the game scene. We see we've currently got the canvas scaler set to a constant pixel size, and a lot like what we did with the title screen in previous videos, what we really want to do is we want to say that this was actually scale with a screen size, and we want to say that we originally targeted a screen size of 960 by 540, which is half of an HD resolution, and we'll set the match mode to 0.5 so that it takes, if you hover over that, it takes the scaling as a ratio between the height, the reference height, and the reference width as well. So we'll set that to 0.5, and if we run that now, we can see that it looks good on a tiny screen, and it looks good on a higher resolution screen as well. Cool. Let's save that up. So that pretty much fixes all the GUI glitches. So the last thing we really need to do to our game is to make it mobile friendly is to add a mute button. So whilst our sound effect and music is pretty cool, you know, people playing in public are not going to want that blaring from their mobile device. So what we should do is give them an easy way to mute all the sounds. So what we're going to do is, going back to our title scene, if we open up our title screen scene, select our canvas over there, hover over the screen, we can press F so that it focuses on the canvas, and we can zoom in a little bit there. What we're going to do is we're going to add a new button in the bottom corner here, which is going to be our mute button. So with the canvas open, we're going to right click, UI, button, and that will create us a new button. And what we can do is we can click on the source image for the button, select our custom button over there. Cool. And we can also click on its anchor point and set its anchor point to be the bottom right corner, because we want the button to kind of be fixed to the bottom right corner of the screen regardless of resolution. And we can also hold down the Alt key and click to set the position to the bottom right corner. Cool. And we can call this button BTN mute. Cool. Now this button currently has a text in it, so we don't want text, we actually want a little icon in there. So what we can do is we can delete the text element out of that, and then open up our sprites folder. And if we then go to our Kenny assets and go to the art game icons, where's game icons? Game icons, PNG, white, 1x resolution. We have two useful icons, an audio off icon and an audio on icon. So we can grab those two sprites or PNGs and drag them into our sprites folder there. And we now have an audio off icon and an audio on icon. Cool. So going back to our button now, if we can right click, we can use UI and we can add an image to that. And we're going to pick a source image and we'll do audio off. And then we'll also add another one, UI image, and we will set that to audio on. So the first one, which has the audio off, we can call image audio off. And the other one, which has got the audio on, we're going to call image audio on. Cool. Unity's also by default sized those widths of the images to 100 by 100, but they're originally, if we look carefully down here, we can see they're actually 50 by 50. So what we can do is we can just control click to select both of those and set their width to 50 and their height to 50. And then the other thing is they are currently, their pivot point is set to the center, and their position is set to the center as well. So that's relative to their parent. And because both of them are relative to the button, they're basically sitting on top of each other, which means we could toggle them on and off. For instance, we could do that one and turn this one on. We can turn that one off and this one on. So that gives us the ability to toggle. By toggling the images, we can show like a button state when the button gets clicked. So we can just leave those both on for the moment. Cool. Now, for the button itself, let's resize that button. Let's make it 10 pixels bigger than the icon. So let's make it, say, 60 by 60. And then we can grab the button and position it to sit just on the side there. Okay, save our scene. And if we run that, try a slightly higher resolution device like an iPad. There we are. Now we've got our button on the screen. Cool. All right. So now we need to wire this button up so that it does something when we click it. And what we want to do is, apart from toggling the sound, we also need to enable or disable the appropriate image as well, so we can show button state. So if we go and we know on our canvas object we have a menu controller that we added earlier. If we open that up, we can see that currently it's doing the start game for when the start button is pressed. So we're going to add some things to this. So the first things we're going to do is add two public attributes. So game object, and the one's going to be audio on icon, and the other one will be public game object audio off icon. So we save that and switch back to Unity. We'll now see that our menu controller has two options we can set there. So we're going to drag the audio on icon into, or rather image audio on into the audio on icon, and image audio off into the off icon. All right. So now we have two references to those that we can manipulate in the code. So jumping back to the code, we are going to need to store the value that was set, and ideally remember it between restarts of the game. So Unity provides a useful class for that, and it's called the player prefs class, and it allows you to store simple settings like the current options that the player or the user has set for the game. So we're going to use that to remember the current state of the mute button. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a public method, public void toggle sound, and in here we are going to get the current state of the mute button, and if it's currently muted, we're going to set the state to not be muted, and if it isn't muted, we're going to set the state to be muted. So we're going to say if player prefs dot get int. So you can see you can store get floats, integers, and strings from the player prefs. We want an integer value. Get int, and we're going to call our value muted. And we also get to specify the default value. So that means if this is the value that get is specified, if the player preference has never been set, so we're going to set it to 0. which is we're going to say is not muted. So if it's not muted, we're going to set the player prefs. We're going to use the set int muted to 1, and if it's already set, we are going to set the player preference to 0. So just looking at that code again, we're going to call this whenever we press the button for the mute button, and what we're going to say is if the muted value is currently 0, then set it to 1, and if it's currently 1, it will set to 0, and by default it will be set to 0. So the first time through it will be 0. All right. So back in Unity, what we want to do is on the button, we now want to add a click handler. So we select the button and we want to do something when the button gets clicked. So we're going to say add that there, and we're going to pick our object. Might be easier to just drag the canvas into there. And the function we want to call is on the menu controller toggle sound. All right, so save that and run. So we press the button, we call in that toggle sound method, but nothing's actually happening, and that's because that method is just simply setting the player preference. It's not actually touching the sound. All right, so back in our code, we're going to add a new method, and this is the one that's actually going to set the sound on and off. So, and I'll explain why we have it in a separate method shortly. So we're going to say a method called set sound state. Set sound state, and in here we're going to say if player prefs dot get int muted is once again defaulting to 0. If is equal to 0, then we want to treat that as not muted. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the audio listener, and we're going to set its volume equal to 1. All right, so it's a bit weird. The audio listener is the listener in 3D space, which then gets translated to your speakers, and by default just calling audio listener on the class will give you the main listener in your scene or in your game. So it's a bit weird to be setting something called volume on something that's called a listener, but this actually works. So pretty much we're going to set the volume on the listener to 1, which means it's turned on. And then what we're going to do is we want to say that the audio on icon dot set active to true, and we'll set the audio off icon set active to false. So we're going to hide the off icon and do the on icon. Otherwise, we're going to do the opposite. And so what we're going to do is, if it is muted, we're going to, so if muted is equal to 1, we're going to set the audio volume to 0. We're going to set the on icon to false, and we're going to set the off icon to true, effectively turning the sound off and toggling the icons. Now we need to actually call this, and we're going to call this from 2 places, which is why we made it a separate method. The first place we're going to call it is after the button's being clicked, and that means that we will react to the current state of the button. So we'll click, we'll toggle the state of the muted, and remember that for future use, and then actually turn the sound on and off based on the state of the muted option. The other place that we want to call this is up in the start method. And this pretty much means that when the menu controller starts up, it's going to call this method here, the set sound state, which will then look at the current state of the muted preference and toggle the volume accordingly and the icons accordingly, which means that if we exit the game and start the game again, the start method here will be called, and then we will, based on the previous setting of the sound or the muted value, toggle the sound on and off. So if we give that a test and we run that, we see that based on our previous clicking, the sound is off. Now the sound is on, and the sound is off again, or the sound's on. Turn it off, we can then carry on playing our game, and everything's all good. And we can exit our game, sound's still off, and turn it back on. Alright, and if we restart our game, it is currently turned on. Let's turn it off, exit the game, start it up again, and it starts in a turned off state. Alright, so we have now added a mute button. Let's mute that, and we can just do a quick test on a couple of different resolutions to see that the button is visible on the screen, and that's all looking pretty good. Alright, let's save that scene. Cool. Alright, and with that, our game is finally complete. So in the next few videos, we'll be covering building and publishing the games for various platforms, and I'll be walking through all the steps for each of the platforms. So as always, please like this video if you liked it, share it with others, and remember to subscribe to the channel to receive notifications when I post new videos. Thank you very much for watching.